Explorers, Laura the Explorer here asking core human questions. Today we are exploring, if I have a bad thought, does that make me a bad person? I don't know about you, but sometimes I have mean thoughts. Sometimes I'll judge somebody for how they look, for their lifestyle choices, for being too slow standing in line. I hate that. Or sometimes I'll have scary thoughts. I'll imagine myself getting hit while crossing the street by a car. Our thoughts sometimes can feel wild, unruly, negative, scary, and mean. We can be judgmental, we can be harsh, and we can be critical. But if we have these thoughts, does that mean that we are a bad person? I'm guessing you can answer this question. The answer is no. And I'll tell you why. If you've ever sat in meditation and you've been with your thoughts, you come to realize that your thoughts aren't you. Your thoughts don't make up who you are. It sounds like a strange thing because we feel very close to our thoughts. Aren't they coming from inside of us? If it isn't us, who else could it be? Nobody else is responsible for what's going on in my head. We're with our thoughts every day, all day. If they're not us, then what are they? There's a magical thing that happens when you get quiet with your thoughts and you give them a little bit of space, like you're an observer watching a movie playing out. That space allows you to realize a couple of things. Number one, thoughts don't really seem to come from anywhere. They kind of arise, almost as if they're in the middle of a thought. One teacher named Norman Fisher wrote in his book, Training in Compassion, try to find the start of a thought, where you actually start beginning of the story once upon a time. Often you'll find that thoughts jump in as if they're a couple seconds ahead of the start. They've already been somewhat formed. Thoughts also seem very non sequitur. They'll go from one thing to the next, and they could be seemingly unrelated. A lot of people reference our minds as the monkey mind. I also think of it as a cat chasing a laser, jumping all over the place and pretty erratic and wild. When we get a bit of distance from our thoughts, we also see that they don't have the gravity that we give them when they stand on their own. For example, if I'm sitting in meditation and I have the thought that I'm terrible at meditation, if I wasn't being aware and observant, that thought might feel like it speaks to my worth, that I am a terrible meditator. But when I'm in meditation and that thought arises, what meditation allows is for a little bit of extra space. It allows us to have that perspective of watching the movie rather than being in it. So instead of that thought being something that represents my worth, represents who I am, I can instead have a little bit of distance and go, oh, that's an interesting thought. And then we move on. Now, it's pretty easy to do that for silly thoughts. Even thoughts that are negative about yourself, like I'm a terrible meditator. That's something that I could laugh at. But if I have a negative thought about somebody else, it often makes me feel mean, makes me feel like a bad person, and then I feel like an imposter. Going around, people think that I'm a nice person, but secretly I have all these bad thoughts. But the same rule applies for negative thoughts and for bad thoughts. So if you're standing in line and you're judging the person ahead of you for being slow or being on their Instagram feed, and you go on your Instagram feed too, but it's not the same thing, and so you can judge them. And then you become aware that you're having that thought. Instead of going right to, gosh, I am a terrible person, we can still have that distance, look at that thought, and realize, that's an interesting thought. You see, it's not the thought that matters. I know we always say it's the thought that counts, and that's true when you're giving gifts and maybe you gave the wrong gift. But this is in relating to your thoughts. It's not the thought that counts, it's how you relate to it. So if you have a negative thought, do you act on it? If you're in a situation where you're having an argument with somebody and you have a thought that you could tear them apart in that moment by sharing that bit of feedback, digging up a little bit of garbage about their past and throw that in their face, you could have that thought arise, but do you act on it? Do you actually do it? Now that doesn't make you a bad person either, but what you want to do is try to interrupt the space between having the thought and then acting on it. Similarly, if you have a negative thought and you realize that you had it and you turn around and you beat yourself up, that's another action that you are taking based on that negative thought. You are being reactive right along with the thought. So instead, what we do, we don't necessarily control our thoughts. We aren't able to eliminate all the negative thoughts, but we realize that they're not us, that they don't come from our essence, our being, our sense of worth, our value, being enough in the world. So we look at the thoughts and we realize, oh, that's an interesting thought. And then we let it go. And then to the best of our abilities, we extend compassion to ourselves. We can tell ourselves, I'm not a bad person. I'm not a mean person, even when I have those thoughts. At the start of the video, I posed the question, where do these thoughts even come from? One of my teachers gives this amazing answer, and he says, from everything else. That we are made up of all of our experiences. We're made up of our rearing from childhood up until now. We're made up of our failures and our successes and our stories. And we're made up of pasts and histories that we carry for other people, that we've adopted because we've interacted with them. Every single thing that has happened to us has created who we are. Everything that has happened to me has created a mind that sometimes has mean thoughts, that has scary thoughts, that has negative thoughts. And if I were to judge those thoughts and think that that makes me a bad person, then there's nothing that I can do about that. That's a level of suffering that you just kind of throw up your hands and you're like, well, I guess I'm a bad person for the rest of my life. But it's not true. How do you act on those thoughts? How do you treat yourself when you realize you're having those thoughts? I now work on trying to create a little bit of space, trying to create the opportunity for me to choose how I want to react rather than being at the mercy of my thoughts. And I also work really, really hard on extending love, compassion, and forgiveness to myself because I'm not a bad person. And you're not a bad person either. We could all just use a little bit of work. Remember, explorers, you have the power to create your life. All right, friends, thank you so much for joining me for this exploration today. If you enjoyed this video and you'd like to keep going deeper, make sure to subscribe, and I'll see you next time.
I want you, taking your time and you're slowing down mine, but I just wanna love you. But counting the ways you can say my name, but I don't want no other.